Hello and welcome to the SC Launch and Learn with Jack Harvey of Accelerise. Today we're talking about smart scaling to success. Before we begin, I'd like to go over two housekeeping items. First of all, if you can hear me, please raise your hand in the webinar controls. Welcome to SC Launch and Learn with Jack Harvey of Accelerise. Today we are talking about smart scaling your company to success. Before we begin, we'd like to go over two housekeeping items. First of all, if you can hear me, please raise your hand in the webinar controls. All right, Rodney, it looks like you can hear me. Is there anybody else? There we go. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Secondly, on today's format for the webinar, we will keep participant audio muted. So if you have questions, feel free to type them into the webinar controls at any time. We will pause about 20 minutes in for Q&A, and then we will have a Q&A period again at the end. I will be reading the questions out loud, and Jack will be answering them. My name is Julia Linton, and I serve as the Operations Manager for SC Launch, and I'd like to hand the mic over to Jill Sorensen now, the SC Launch Director, to introduce Jack.
Thank you, Julia. Jack Harvey, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have the hour with you to talk about a really important topic for our companies. Thanks to all of you listening in, and for those who might dial in later, we are recording. Part of the SC Launch and Learns is to make expertise and resources like Jack and Accelerize available to you real time or later on if folks want to dial in. So we will spend an hour talking through a really important topic. And even though scalability and growth for our company sounds like something that's more advanced or beyond the startup, it's actually something that is integral to planning from the get-go. Right, Jack?
It sure is.
Anticipating the horizon line and how you move from your core beginnings to next steps is pretty important. So a little word about Jack. Jack is a technology executive who is, by nature and by expertise, growth-oriented. So he's pretty well programmed through agency to get companies moving up from wherever they're at. You've got a nice background in IT primarily, data science, social media, ad tech, mobile payments, and software. For those listening in, Jack served most recently as president and CEO of Own the Room, where he led worldwide growth, bringing the company communications methodology to over 100 global 500 companies, 27 countries, 7 different languages. It sounds like that might also always be the norm today, right? We're kind of omnipresent.
Right, global, for sure.
On the internet. Prior to Own the Room, Jack served as the Executive Vice President for Partnerships at Techstars, the juggernaut company Gnip, where Jack, you helped set the stage for a $134 million sale to Twitter. That was in 2014.
Yeah, couple other people were involved as well, but yeah, I was there as part of the team. Yeah,
pretty exciting experience.
Yeah, it was
great. So you shared with us that you like building power relationships. You're here today to talk about what that looks like and to give our companies and those dialing in some pointers to pave the way for acquisition, possible IPO, new product launches, really whatever's in that spectrum of scaling and growth.
Right.
So I've done a little summary here, but I know that's just a thumbnail. What did I miss? Can you share with the folks listening in?
Well, sure. So one, thank you, and that was a great overview and introduction, Jill. So I'm going to actually go back to the word that you used earlier, origins. And I was talking to a good friend yesterday about the first company I ever started, which is actually late high school, early college. in the little New England town that I grew up in that was founded in 1635. So we're talking old homes, old village, seaside town, and the company was a painting company. And I was taught how to paint and how to restore these old homes from a guy that was an Annapolis grad. He was an engineer by trade, and at the time he was retired, but he was kind of doing this as a hobby. And what he taught me was you really need to make sure that you get to the base layer of what you're trying to refinish. And if you run into rots, like you don't want to cover, you got to get sometimes right down to the studs and make that the prep that you do and really understanding that you're working with a really strong substrate. Then you can work your way up from there. And there's so many different lessons in that, but one of which was really digging deep to understand what are we working with, what are the underlayers of what we think we see, because when we start to build on that, in this case restore and paint, it's all subject to that prep. It's all subject to understanding what's beneath. And it's been a great lesson that I've carried throughout my career, and it goes right to the days of Accelerise. We'll get to that in a minute, but one of the things that is a through line through my career and into Accelerise and into our work with clients is taking the time to really understand our customer, understand who's there, what's there, and we have a whole process of doing that, which we'll go into in a little bit. But yeah, I'll give a little bit more color to some of my background. My professional work has really been focused on working with companies in the position of I'm either president and CEO, or I'm part of the management team leading strategy and business development and helping grow the company in the most strategic areas. So one of the first companies I'll mention is a company that Paul Allen started after he left Microsoft, which was a software R&D shop in Bellevue, Washington. And they got traction in the distance learning space, rebranded the company Click to Learn, and one of the more significant challenges or opportunities at that point was taking that company globally. So put together a joint venture with SoftBank over in Japan and launched the company in Japan. Fast forward a bit further within News Corp, and I was specifically working for TV Guide's Consumer Electronics Group, but part of this project that was looking at the intersection of high-speed data lines coming into the home and the smartphone, which at that time was kind of this nebulous thing, becoming a real thing and allowing the consumer to have greater command and control over their media experience. And we knew that what had happened with music had really upended that industry. And so our challenge was, okay, what do these technologies mean to film and television and that economic model? So coalesced quite a team around understanding that, and the output of a lot of that work led to the creation of Hulu and all the major networks putting their content online and eventually to the phone. And that's the world we live in now, so being a part of that. And then another company, you mentioned Gnip, which is probably one of the more fascinating teams I've ever been a part of. Culturally, incredibly well aligned. We had an incredible leader in Chris Moody, our founder, Judd Valesky, really just tuned into how to grow a company, how to build a team, and how to create exceptional outcomes for our customers. And Gnip was a lot of things, but essentially a platform that aggregated social media data for Twitter and Tumblr and Foursquare and a number of others, and made it accessible to Fortune 500 companies to make better, more informed business decisions. And we after 5 years of operation, had a great exit to Twitter. And then I think one of the more notable outcomes of that was the the growth that Gnip had inside of Twitter, and it's grown magnificently inside of Twitter, and that's in large part because of the pre-work that was done at Gnip to build something that could really scale. Culture was strong, our systems were strong, just so many great decisions made at the early stages that allowed for that future growth to be realized. So that's, and then On the Rim, just another great experience in scaling, and On the Rim is, hands down, in my opinion, the best communications training company in the world, working with titans of technology and their teams globally to tell their story, which again is, you can have the best plan in the world, but if you can't communicate it effectively, that's a significant limiting factor. So I feel very fortunate to have had all those different experiences throughout my career, starting back with, learning how to paint antique home and prep that so that it will, be standing, another 50, 100 years from now, right up to social media data and how that's used to make, important business decisions.
What beautiful framing. I can see the hour is going to fly, because I have questions just about some of the things that you highlighted. Can I interject before
please.
You tell us a little bit more about Accelerize? You, on the subject of Gnip, for example, a focus on value, what we orient our companies all the time to be able to address. But sometimes we'll hear discrepant views. Focus on getting to revenue. Don't focus on exit at this time. Just build a strong company. But just as easily, we will hear, you always have to be thinking about your exit strategy or what happens in particular if you're drawing an investor.
Right.
So when you started Gnip, is that the way that you worked, or did you really focus on that foundation, the origin, make sure that it's reliable? And
Sure. So I didn't start Gnip. It was actually Judd Valesky and a number of others. I came in a few years later. But one of the things that Gnip did a really, really good job with is, and I'll kind of take a little bit of a step back. So Chris Moody, who came in as COO and was a Techstars mentor to Gnip, he and I worked for the same billionaire in Boston, a guy by the name of John Schwang, who started Aquent, which is the largest marketing staffing firm in the world, and we were doing some really interesting technology projects there. But one of the things that he taught us is always build to last. Build as if this needs to be thriving 50, 100 years from now. And when you build with that level of vision and quality, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to want to be a part of that. You're going to have a lot of people that are going to take interest in say, okay, that if I buy that or partner with it, it's going to hold up. And so I believe that a lot of those core decisions were made at Gnip, and that's why Gnip inside Twitter is thriving. And that team is doing, that acquisition was 2014, so we're coming up on actually right about the 5-year anniversary, and that's just a thriving part of that organization. But back to setting that up for scale, we had great leaders that really were other-centric. I was just as excited and passionate about how do I create the success for Jill, and I know that's kind of a shared spirit of how we work together. We had things like there is no vacation policy. We all know what the work is that needs to be done. Let's just do it. We were voted, I think, by Outside Magazine several years in a row as one of the top places to work. It was common for people to walk in and out, to go take a mountain bike ride or a hike or a yoga class. We were just, the pace of it there's seasons where you're pushing really hard, but there was a real, I would say, healthy cadence and focus. And then I think one of the bigger and more important experiences that I took away from my time at Gnip, and we pour into our work with Accelerise clients, is how do you handle conflict? And inevitably there's going to be some sort of conflict or significant issue, and we really committed to attacking the problem and not the people. Let the problem be the problem. When you go at attacking the problem and bring the best thinking, best energy to solving that, you don't create new problems that might be very difficult to undo. So that's another kind of core value that was really, really helpful.
That's an important one. And one you have to keep relearning or refocusing on. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Important insights. So you've got some slides to share with us on Accelerize.
Right.
Do we have time, Julian, to review those?
Sure. Great. So the headline here in the creation of Accelerize, it's really the embodiment of everything that I've experienced in my 30-year career in being a part of early and growth stage companies. The relationships, the thinking, the successes, the face plants. We're a network of company builders that range from subject matter expertise, neuroscientists, to venture capitalists, people that have helped build products at Apple, Microsoft. These are people that have the scars and trophies of having gone through all the twists and turns in growing companies. So Accelerize, again, we're company builders, and one of the first things that we do is we dig really deep to listen and understand what the company actually needs, and almost in a kind of ethnographic study. We're not actually living with these people, but really taking the time to dig deep and understand who's there, what's possible. And we have a whole system that we use to do that. It's a trademark process called SmartScaling. And typically what that launches with is a 3 to 5 day deep dive and going through every business unit of the company and understanding current state, and then starting to project out, okay, what could this be in 24 months at scale? And then starting to backcast of, all right, what are all the different stages and gates that need to be hit in order to reach that outcome? And we'll wrap that with, here's the artifact or the 24-month journey based on what we've heard in this highly collaborative, interactive, deep dive session. Here's what that journey looks like. So that's really the process, and in that there's oftentimes the discovery of areas that we can help, areas that the gaps that they need to fill. But one of the things that we hear from our clients is we're so focused on working in the business. You're helping us take that step up and look at how we need to work on the business and getting that trajectory pushed in the right direction and all the different stages and gates that need to be hit there. So the management team that we're working with feels this great sigh of relief, like, okay, now we understand the different details of how this all assembles. And then many times the investors are really valuing that extra level of insight and discipline that we're bringing subject matter experts that some of our team members have managed, multi-billion-dollar line items for Accenture and supply chain and logistics, shipped product for Apple. These are people that know what life looks like at scale, but also we couple that with, here's how you go from early stage to growth. So.
Okay. Thank you. There's so much more to talk about.
Right.
I've got a clock in front of me for those dialing in, and it just seems so unfair that we can't have you elaborate on what you've just summarized there. But we do want to hear from those of you that have dialed in. Any questions out there, go ahead and share them with us, and we can pull those into the conversation here with Jack. We have a field that you can type the question into as part of the webinar, and we'll go ahead and read those out. So, okay. I mean, if you do have questions as we're continuing the conversation, go ahead and share them. We have a strategy of being more interactive. So we won't save the conversation. We'll just try to incorporate if there are thoughts. Okay, so team building. Jack, you've shared some fascinating kernels on conflict management. Team building sounds easy, isn't easy, and isn't always perfect. So could you walk us through some key tips or best practices, perhaps at different stages for companies, of how do you address that for the clients that you're working with?
So one, just some core values and just baselines of one, we're just huge proponents of transparency. That people really need to feel that they're getting the real information, that they're being dealt with honestly and authentically. If there's one thing that will completely upend any sense of team or commitment, it's that feeling that, hey, I'm not getting the full message here. There's something that's being held back. And I'm not saying, look, there's appropriate levels of disclosure. What I'm just saying, being authentic and being transparent. And I think particularly in the environment that we have today, transparency, we see it every day in our headlines. It's got to be a core tenet. And that just allows much more momentum when people are hedging and not, if there's not an environment where you can be transparent and you can just get the real issues out on the table and start to solve for them. What we find is that it slows a company down. And if you imagine you're in your vehicle and the dashboard is actually not accurate, that's going to be a problem. And similarly, if you're trying to make decisions for your department, your company, and that data is just either slow or just kind of hedging, you can't move as quickly. And relationally, we see teams break down pretty quickly. And then the converse is, hey, when we see a team that's being really transparent and in a very respectful and an intentional way, we see performance go up. So that's a core tenet to team building that we like to get out there.
Can we play with that idea
Sure.
across some of the different stakeholders?
Sure.
We talk about team building and communication. We've outlined board members,
yes, senior
management, staff, investors.
Sure.
If we could sample, and I know we've had a couple of conversations about your board members, how we communicate with and build transparency and authenticity with our board is a combination of strategy and communication skill, because just dumping a bunch of information on board members doesn't mean you've been effective necessarily. So what kind of tips would you give, just starting with that group of stakeholders?
Sure, it's a great question, and I really need to credit Brad Feld, the leader of Foundry Group and one of the creators of Techstars, and also Chris Moody, CEO of Gnip, and now he's a partner of Foundry Group with the way that we managed board meetings, and Feld actually has a whole blog post on this, so if anybody wants to get the detail on it. But it was just a really effective way of conducting board meetings. And I'll go back to my painting analogy. It's the work that you do prior and the systems that you have in place prior to the board meeting that actually make for a very effective board meeting. And so one of the things that we did is several weeks prior, we would have the meeting with the management team. Okay, hey, we're going to make this update. Let's go into the document, and it's a living, breathing Google Doc, and we're putting all the updates in there. All right, it's all set, great. At least a week in advance, it goes out to the board with the expectation that everybody on the management team is connected and able to interact with any questions. So by the time you reach a board meeting, you're down to 2, maybe 3 top questions that the board is going to go after and focus on. So the board meeting transitions away from the typical, which is, all right, we're going to go through slide after slide, go through the deck, and it's an update. Well, that's good, that's fine, but we just focus on your job is to be updated before you walk in and come in with a point of view on, hey, these are the 2 or 3 things that we as a team really need to be focused on. So now all of your best thinking, all of your best energy is focused on those 2 or 3 things, and people are engaged. They're taking action. Anyway, I know if I'm joining a board, I want to, with better things to do than to just sit and get an update. I actually want to help. So this is a great way to actually engage and focus and get momentum.
Board members can sometimes be pretty swamped and busy people. Do you ever have to train the board members how to manage their time so that when that board meeting comes along, they're not catching up and ruffling through papers or digital files?
Yeah, and look, everybody, the time is our single greatest limiting factor in most cases. And just kind of winding back in the formation of a board, one of the things that for earlier stage companies, maybe start with a board of advisors first. Really understand, how much is this person actually going to be able to contribute? How focused are they? Because that board position is a really important seat, and you really want that person to be engaged and actually be able to deliver in the areas that you need them to deliver in. So again, kind of goes back to that pre-work of how do we start to interview and consider who should be on the board, and then being very clear on, hey, here's the commitment that we require, which feeds back into the culture that you're setting and all that. So getting that clarity, and I think it also hits on the transparency. Like, this is not just a position to literally occupy a seat. Here are our expectations, and so just that clarity, I think, is real helpful.
Helpful. Can we pivot a little bit
Sure.
to senior management? Because I think perhaps the nature of communications might be a bit different. With boards, it can be more formal, right? What are some good tips for pulling together your senior management and getting everybody lockstep?
Yeah, so I think one, that cadence of transparency, accountability, and also levity. I mean, how are you truly able to have fun? Where does humor play in the day-to-day? Is clearly there's always going to be challenges at any stage of a company, but how do you kind of manage through that? Is this a team that knows that there's serious work to be done, but also takes things in context? And think this also kind of goes back to culture and what kind of a culture are you creating, and how well, one, do you define your culture? Two, how well are you living up to and kind of reinforcing that culture? And are you willing to make the sacrifices when it's really hard to say, you know what, we know we need to fill this position. It's super important. This person on paper looks great, but are they a cultural fit? Mm-hmm. And nailing that is difficult, but it's worth taking the time to make sure that you do have that cultural fit. So again, these kind of go back to those core building blocks of team building and communication, and that clarity around, hey, here's what we're about culturally, here's how we operate, and what are those kind of core attributes that are going to be necessary to be a part of this team. Obviously, if you're working in a lab environment, that's different than if you're in an ad agency and working on the next creative for Red Bull. Two different cultures, but nailing that is key.
Have you worked with a client that struggled to answer the question on culture? Mm-hmm. Tell me about your culture. Have you had clients that struggle with that?
I think it's I think if even the companies that have the best culture, strongest cultures, they're tested on that. They're tested on that daily, and your people are watching. There's a instance where years ago we'd made a hire, and it became very apparent that this person was not only not a fit, but potentially going to be a major problem. And the rest of the team was seeing, okay, do these people really back up their culture, and are they going to make a decision that's aligned with the culture that we're all bought into? Mm-hmm. And it was a real moment of truth, and the team made the right decision, and honorably let the person go. But I think so culture is going to be challenged on a regular basis, and it's kind of like if you've ever navigated an airplane or a boat, there's all these micro corrections that are going on to stay on that bearing point. Wind and current and things of that sort. You're very rarely 100% on point, but what keeps you directionally correct is all those micro corrections that you're making second by second. And when you have a strong culture, you're not just making that, but the organization they're making those micro corrections and adjustments throughout the day without you even knowing it. Mm-hmm. So the answer is yes. It comes up a lot, and the companies that I've been a part of take that seriously.
Any special highlights then related to team building and communication for staff? So we've talked about board, we've talked about senior management. We tend to think of leadership as directly related to followership, right? As a colleague of mine once said, you can't lead if no one is following. You have to be communicating where it is that you're going. But do we have bottom-up leadership as well, where staff are concerned?
Right. Well, and I think these are all, again, really important lessons, and huge fan of mentoring and really making sure that every person on the staff has a growth plan, and that they're partnered up with somebody else that is intentionally carving out time to bring that person along. And part of that is the ability to manage up. And that goes to communication, it goes to a lot of different things, but that's those things tend not to do well in a vacuum. It really does need a level of intentionality and a real crisp plan, and some accountability for kind of everybody in the equation. And one of the things that we do is on a quarterly basis, there's a corporate meeting. Hey, here's the focus for where we're going after for the year. How does that translate to this quarter? And the direct report comes with those goals and meets with the person that they're being managed by, and they sort that out together in very real, tangible, measurable goals, and not 24, 2 to 3, 3 to 5. But the intention is to actually get these things done, and getting them done is going to be known. It's a numeric, it's a date, it's a signed deal, it's very clear, done, not done. And that level of clarity really helps momentum and growth.
We've mentioned investors, but all the classes of participants we've talked about are investors, right?
Sure,
the employees are investing in a real way.
Time, energy, thinking, right?
The technical investors also want information. Would you change any of what you've summarized for us related to building transparency or maintaining transparency with investors?
So yeah, transparency is again core, and expectations. And I think one of the things that sometimes, well, I'll put this completely in the positive, is the ability to set a vision and then set expectations around, hey, here's how we're going to get there. That's a very, very delicate balance, because you're early in growth stage, you have to set some pretty bold goals, and you are, in many cases, you're doing something that's never been done before, and you're building something that hasn't existed before. And so you're taking people on quite a incredible journey, but it's the ability to credibly set expectations and getting that those regular check-ins, authentic, transparent check-ins. Hey, here's what we set out to do. Here's exactly where we are. And my experience has been, whether it's your investors, your board members, your team, the authenticity goes a long way. People want, and in these cases, all of them, they have vested interest in the success, and they want to help. They want to, in most cases, help. They don't want to be detractors. They want to help. Their questions may be tough, but sometimes we deserve those tough questions. They're helpful. So again, that goes back to the transparency and, hey, here's the dashboard. Well, if we know that the tank is running low, then top of mind is, how do we fuel back up again? Engine's running hot, or everything's checking out great, good, forge ahead. But being able to provide the clear data on what's the current state allows really good thinking and contributions to turn the corner or pump the brakes because it's a cliff.
So let's talk about how companies engage you. When does the company, when do they know to bring you in?
Sure.
What's the right time?
So it's not uncommon for us to be brought in by somebody who just knows us at the C-level within the organization. Maybe it's an investor or a board member. But typically the triggering event is there's a sense of urgency that we have reached a point in our company growth where we need to move fast, and we also need to move with great accuracy. And we work with some of the most smart teams doing incredibly disruptive work, but they're constrained by, hey, we have a head count of X. What we really need is a head count of X plus much more, and we're able to kind of come in with really, really strong subject matter expertise that has been there, done that, and can save months and millions of dollars by just, for example, we have one client that part of their business model is building an online marketplace. Well, one of our Accelerise council members is somebody that helped build eBay's marketplace. You bring that person in to discuss, all right, so here's lessons learned, and that's worth months of guessing.
Right.
And it's like, no, there's the answer. So go ahead.
And you're able to bring in an interdisciplinary team. So.
Yes, it's so we will again start with that understanding of what exactly does the company need, and we'll do a kind of a 2-hour assessment there, and then based on what we hear, we'll then in our SmartScaling sessions, we've populated that room, and that those sessions are being led with senior level executives that have direct subject matter expertise in the areas that you need to build and solve for. Mm-hmm. So we're listening with context, and then we come back with a plan that's highly credible based on decades of experience in your specific area. So if it's a supply chain logistics challenge, we have a person that has managed that billions of dollars of levels for Fortune 100 companies within one of the top consulting firms in the world. So it's that level. When we're pitching a neurotech opportunity, we spent about 4 hours with Sanjay Gupta, who's a pretty well-known neurosurgeon and chief medical correspondent at CNN, and talk through what the possibilities were there. So bringing that level of thinking and point of view.
So there is a question that's posed, can we also discuss startups and programs for new companies? So that does relate, thank you, Kevin, to a question that we've anticipated. Do you work with companies that are pre-revenue?
We do, yeah. And pre-revenue, but have cash in the tank. We are a for-profit business. So they have to have real investment dollars in there, and so the answer is yes. And we use the same systems and people with these early stage companies, and bringing them right through the same systems and getting them up from initial thinking and design to here's an actual structure and plan to go from your current state to 24 months out. And obviously that looks different from we'll call it zero stage to a company that's generating tens of millions of dollars and needs to get to their site is how do we hit 100 million. A lot of the same core principles apply, but
So what a number of the startups, and we've got a launch as a portfolio currently of 142 active companies at different stages, so not all of them ready for scaling and growth per se, but to put them in the best position to get there, suggestions, tips, resources that those companies could be lining up for themselves to be in touch with you at some point?
Sure. So happy to take a call or an email from any of the people in your portfolio. Happy to do that. So yeah, I think who you surround yourself with really, really matters, and also working hard to be as self-aware as possible. One of my mentors is a guy that started two of the more prolific venture firms in Boston, Northbridge Venture Partners and Highland Capital. And in so doing, he's helped grow some of the biggest name brands that we know, Staples and a number of others. And one of the things that he was drilled into my head with founders in particular is a very simple question. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? They're very different. And so being self-aware, knowing what your limitations are, being rigorous in asking yourself the tough questions and giving permission to people that can pull you into account and you know what, I think you're off the rails on this one. And so having a strong group of advisors that aren't just friends and family. These are people that have context to understand your area of business, what your competition is, and can give you that kind of tough guidance when needed.
Thank you. So on the subject of preparing startups to be oriented, and we hear, for example, the phrase pivot.
Right.
Pivot in part comes from trying to figure out as that newer entrant, all right, what's our best entry?
Mm-hmm.
And we can't get to scaling if we didn't get part of that foundational assessment right. One suggestion noted here is take advantage of boot camps. Some of them are 14-day, some of them are 30, some as long as 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
Suggestions for those that are a little earlier in the process of getting the right orientation?
Sure, and so I not every boot camp or tech accelerator is great. So I would start with talking to and looking at what has the output been. Okay, well, so this tech accelerator or boot camp has been around for X amount of time. What's become of these companies?
Mm-hmm.
And make your decision based on what the output has been. So, case in point, Techstars has launched something like over 900 different companies over the last 10 years, and don't quote me on these numbers, but I think it's something like 85% of those companies are either still operating or have been bought. That's a really good track record. That's a really good set of outcomes. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage anybody to don't just go, well, I'm checking the box off, there's a boot camp. Your time is precious. Don't surrender it to people that have not produced, or groups that have not produced significant outcomes. Be selective. And one of the better stories of Gnip is one of the early guys in Gnip was a guy who grew up in Moncks Corner and is a Clemson grad and had an idea. So, you know what, I'm going to go to the best tech accelerator I can. And he went to Boulder, and first company faltered a little bit, and then he got clipped into Gnip, and he's pretty darn successful.
And with that, plugged into mentors and,
yes.
and a network
right.
of advisors.
Right.
So we're looking here at a question that's come in. I'm sorry. We're just fielding questions at the same time as we're having our conversation.
Right.
So one of the things we've talked about, Jack, is some use cases. Mm-hmm. Are there any sector-specific examples of models of scaling and growth that you could highlight for us? And we might start with the IT sector.
Sure. So some kind of case in point examples. Company that is in probably the first 6-7 months of operation, has product and service out in the market, and launching in one city, and now looking to launch in about 24 cities, and a team that's about 5, and they have revenue, they have some investment, but now they need to really put the gas to growth in a market that is becoming pretty competitive. So doing that deep dive discovery session with the team, understanding, okay, where's your current state? What else is happening in this marketplace right now? Where do you need to be in the next 24 months in order to really have a shot at being one of the top brands in this sector? And here's the IT infrastructure you're going to need. Here's the data strategy you're going to need. Here's the culture you're going to need. Here's how you tell the story to the outside world. Starting to pressure test the economic model. How is that going to work? And then looking at, from a funding standpoint, what are you likely going to need in order to get there? And then, that's the journey, the document that we provide, and then Accelerize will clip in the subject matter experts to literally start working alongside the core team in the areas that they need most, whether that's supply chain or logistics, or could be actually helping build the software that runs the organization, to business development and getting into the C-suite of big companies that will help that company turn a corner quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does that translate to the other sectors for the most part?
It does, and this is the real beauty of the design of Accelerise, is that our system, our methodology, the SmartScaling methodology, is applicable and relevant and drives value to a huge company that might have a project or a struggle in a certain area. Apply that same process we would somebody that has just received their first $1 million in funding, and they're figuring out how do we start to get this into actual production. The same process.
I've got a question about, it's just a more generic question, actually.
Sure.
What are some lessons learned that you've encountered where companies didn't quite get the scaling or their growth planning and process right, that you could share with listeners?
Yeah. I think one of this, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, sometimes you need to go slow to go fast. And I'll repeat that. Sometimes you need to go slow in order to go fast. Particularly if you're building something, software can be a great example, where you have one shot to impress the customer. You have one shot to get this out into the open and have a reporter review it. And if you don't nail it, you're going to be playing catch up. And sometimes it's uncatchable. So going slow to make sure that you have pressure tested it and it actually is going to work and succeed. And it's a very, very difficult balance, because there's that tension of, hey, we've got to be opportunistic, we've got to move quickly, we have to be bold. But going and showing up in a market and not being ready for that market, or showing up and there's issues, taking something out before it's really ready can be a real problem. And sometimes it's that somebody's greatest strength, an unguarded strength, can be a double weakness. Charging ahead and let's go, which is very much needed, but not at the expense of you're going to go, but you're going to show up with not being ready. And the lights are going to turn on, and good luck with that.
I imagine that advisors could be key to guiding a company as to how to evaluate the right speed to be operating at. Suggestions for how to engage advisors. You mentioned being for-profit, and we want people to be engaged for all the right reasons in life. Their expertise really should be a driving factor, but especially for those of our early companies that might be a little bit cash-strapped, ideas there for how to bring those folks across?
Absolutely, and that's where you want to find people that have a high level of altruism, that really care about your area. And my experience has been that if you really are building something with great purpose and passion, and it truly is addressing an actual need in the market, and you've done your homework, it's clear that you're working hard and you're making progress, your ability to reach out to subject matter experts, even some of the most seemingly unreachable ones, if you're persistent and you're very careful with their time and honoring them, I think people might be surprised in the level of access and input that they're able to get. I think that drives to kind of a core, cultural universal of, trying to help another person out that's trying to do a good work. That's been my experience anyway.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Someone at an event I attended earlier this week was noting some of those advisors are sitting in funds, and a smart phone call to a fund manager to understand, especially if you're thinking about scalability and growth, I'm going to need a certain amount of capital to achieve whatever it is I'm interested in doing. You can be learning from those fund managers.
Right.
What do they invest in? What do they not care about? Don't waste their time.
Right.
So not all of it is cash outlay for
Exactly. And then obviously if it gets into, and I'll typically just start with, hey, can we have a 15-minute conversation?
Yeah.
I have two questions that I just love, and it might not even be 15 minutes. And more often than not, that person is more than ready to give you more than 15 minutes. But start with the humble ask of just 15 minutes. And obviously, if there's something more meaningful, then you need to start to acknowledge that value in either an equity stake or some actual cash.
We are close to the end of our launch in an hour, which is kind of amazing to me because I have a whole range of additional questions for you, Jack. I will toss out very quickly if anyone's got a last-minute question for Jack. Go ahead and type it in for us. Otherwise, I'm gonna throw out this one, Jack. We haven't really covered. We skimmed around it a little bit, but in terms of CEOs and founders, really important for driving culture and bringing passion to why should this company even exist. Have you encountered situations where it was time to swap out a particular founder or CEO, and how do you raise awareness and handle a situation like that?
I think you, in the best scenarios, people understand and are committed to the work that needs to be done, and not the mechanics of how a company is controlled and how people are compensated. Like, who is the best person to lead given the stage that we're at right now? What actually needs to be achieved? And again, this goes back to self-awareness. It goes back to, do you want to be king or do you want to be rich? And these are really core issues. But if you can get the team to coalesce around what truly needs to be done, can we agree on that? Okay, what is the best way to get there? And who is that's going to get us there in the most effective way? There's so much built into that to getting there, but in an ideal scenario, the team coalesces around that.
Jack, Harvey, thank you for a very engaging hour. We've enjoyed the time together. Thanks to all the listeners. If you have questions, follow-on questions, please share them with us. If you have ideas about additional subject matter for us to cover in a Launch and Learn, we'd love to hear from you. We're here to help you, along with Accelerize, grow your businesses and get ready for the next level of play. So thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks so much.